When we're holding space for others and we don't allow ourselves to fully embrace our gifts and our potential and bring ourselves as space holders into our zone of genius without a quality of apology, without a quality of diminishing or trying to kind of dull our shine, that is actually the energy that other people pick up on. We might have this belief that we are helping those that we are trying to support by making ourselves less than, so that there is more room for others. And it's paradoxical, because if you are part of the infrastructure that is creating the container for learning, for sharing, for growth, and you begin to shrink yourself, it is shrinking the entire container in which everybody is playing and in which everybody is exploring. So in fact, when you are bringing this quality of unapologetic embracing of your capacity, your power, caveat obviously in a way that is open and expansive and has inbuilt into this intentionality, which is not driven by ego or the need for you to receive validation or gratification, and certainly not a kind of attitude of empowerment isn't about hierarchy and it isn't about dominance. It's about having the courage to stand in your fullness, and being witnessed in that energy is definitely a part of that. But the fine line being that it's not about being witnessed for the purpose of accolade or applause. And if you are in a facilitation role and you can release attachment from what might be a need somewhere for you to receive feedback, taking that out of the equation, in fact, being your own source of that, being secure enough in yourself that you're resourcing from yourself, and that you have a recognition of when you are expanding into the fullness of your confidence and your ability to hold your shape in a way that is unapologetic and is not shrinking. And for that to be enough, for that to be enough to sustain you, but for that also to be fuel and activation for other people in the space, because it does not serve you and it does not serve them to shrink or diminish, because the quality of striving towards something that feels out of one's comfort zone when there is someone else holding space there there might be an element of emulation. There might be an element of, I've never done this before and I'm not very sure, and therefore I need a model, I need a template, I need a framework, I need an example of someone showing up in this quality of energy to encourage me, and for that to be something for me to strive towards, not because they're trying to be like you, not because they're trying to copy you, but because you are holding the door open and inviting people to step into that space. And there's a process that is being enabled by you holding. And if we start to recognize that people are in this space of transition where they might be meeting blocks within themselves as they are kind of trying to stretch their capacity, and in response to that, there are these kind of counter narratives or things that come in which are kind of creating an argument or a rationale as to why, you shouldn't be taking up more space, or you shouldn't be more physically comfortable in your body, or you shouldn't be increasing the clarity of your expression, or you shouldn't be daring to navigate with your voice in a way that you've never done before. If those things come up and you as a facilitator respond to them in a way that matches that energy, it actually shuts everything down and it limits everything. So the task of holding and maintaining your shape, and for that to be expansive enough for you to, make sure that you feel safe and that you feel that you can work with this at a level that feels good to you, that you feel confident and competent, yeah? But that also, as you are tracking and monitoring and recognizing all of these other movements going on, if you're working in a group dynamic and this stuff is coming up, that you're still able to hold your shape, that you're able to see, meet, acknowledge, recognize, and perhaps engage directly with people in the space that are having these kind of moments of popping up and shrinking and expanding and shrinking and coming back, because you've done this part of the work yourself. You recognize these responses because you have traversed that landscape, but you've done enough of the embodiment and the realization of this more fully confident way of space holding, that those ripples are not enough to shake you out of your shape and back into a kind of a more limited version of this quality. And this is hard. It's really, really hard, because there is an element that kind of drives this desire to shrink and to make yourself smaller, because there's a recognition of, someone else is trying to kind of burst forth here and to actually take up more room. And they might be having the exact same struggle, in fact, if there are other bodies in the room, of being like, I feel compelled and invited and keen to go into this, like, break through this barrier into this next level or realization of energy, fullness of energy, but they're grappling with the fact that they don't want to take up space because it might limit someone else. So when you've got lots of different people all kind of swimming in this kind of similar experience, and a lot of that is being driven by a kind of cultural framework and kind of belief around there isn't enough room for everyone, and that I shouldn't be taking up too much space, and that actually it's not necessarily about, oh, it's not safe for me to take up space, but it's about what will be the consequence if I do? Is that going to result in someone else not having access to that? And if we're aware that other folk are going through this, you know, the balance of recognizing that, holding it, but also keeping this quality of capacity there, where we can hold that long enough and in a stable enough way so that actually that process that someone else is going through, there is space above this struggle. There is space because you're holding that space there for them to be able to break through in their own way, in their own time, in their own process, maybe even with encouragement from you, if that is the kind of quality of the dynamic. But that if we lose the shape and we start to shrink, it is also limiting that individual's process and growth, because they sense that and they feel that and they acknowledge the shift there. And there's nothing worse than there being an awareness of a shift in energy, and then a person that you were actually trying to hold space for feeling like they have been the person to cause that shift, you know. And this is where the empowerment piece stands directly in the midst of this work, because as we are becoming more expansive and more expressive and connecting with more layers and parts of ourselves and new depths of feeling, of emotion, of frequency, as we're actually inside of that experience, it's a kind of power struggle at points of expanding and shrinking and trying to feel into, do I like this? Is this pleasurable? Like, it activates and triggers all of these possible discomforts that we have around feeling powerful, and what that means, and what will be the consequence of me stepping into effectively a kind of a more enriching energetic template and way of being and expressing. So to have enough room and enough space where whatever it is that you're sharing is giving that ample bandwidth for these individuals and these people in the space, in the shared space, to get to decide themselves of when they've had enough, because that's the feedback that they're getting about their own capacity and their own limits. And if you have set the space and the tone where there has been a kind of anchor point and a way of people connecting with this quality of choice and empowerment, and actually understanding that they have the ability to set the level and to decide when this is too much for me right now and I'm kind of easing off, that is giving that person the opportunity to experience that themselves and navigate that themselves, rather than you being a kind of dictator to the space of like, okay, that's enough. And that might happen in an explicit way because of the way that you are directing that space, or it might happen in a sort of an unexplicit non-verbal way because of how your energy is showing up and how your nervous system is responding, and at what point actually you feel, okay, I am no longer able to hold this quality and I am now beginning to shrink and diminish. But the distinction being that shrinking and diminishing is about or has been elicited by this belief that if I am radiating in my power, it is going to prevent others from having enough space. And I would like to challenge that idea because we are so sensitive to each other's energy. And when we're in a space where we're exploring energy work effectively in a room with other bodies, it's almost like we forget this, and we forget that even the most subtle non-verbal shift in tone affects everybody in that space. So I think all of this has become even more pointed since we experienced the isolation of lockdown, and then there's been this kind of collective reorientation into shared space and what that means and how we can safely show up, how we can safely hold space, but also how we can safely participate in a way that feels like, you know, that we're part of the same journey or story that we're creating collectively as a group, you know, working through a process together maybe, or an activity, but that also we are allowing there to be sufficient room and flexibility there for people that are on their individual pathways of processing, and that in the role of space holding and facilitation, that we make sure that there is enough room for that person to reach their highest potential on that given day, and that we are not inadvertently placing limitations on them